crumbling inside. I stepped out of the office. The first sign that my wife was cheating was the underwear. And I don't mean finding some random pair in the house that would have been easy to spot. No, this was the same lace set I'd bought her for our anniversary, the one she said was too special to wear casually. But there she was, dressed in it, walking out the door at 8 p.m. on a Tuesday, claiming she had a late dinner meeting with her boss. Now, maybe I should have asked more questions right there. But you've got to understand, when you've been married for 10 years, you learn to pick your battles. At that moment, I let it slide, chalking it up to her wanting to feel confident at work or something. Still, something gnawed at me, a gut feeling that wouldn't go away. I watched her drive off, my mind racing through possibilities, but I told myself I was overthinking. The underwear was probably just a coincidence. Right? Wrong. The lies didn't stop there. The thing about gut feelings? They're almost always right. And no matter how hard I tried to ignore it, that nagging sense of unease only grew worse after the night with the underwear. It wasn't just about the lace. Sarah had changed. Slowly, at first, but once I started looking, I realized the shift had been happening for months. We weren't talking like we used to. Our conversations had dried up, becoming nothing more than passing exchanges about groceries or whether the bills had been paid. No more late-night talks about random things or laughing at stupid TV shows. And let's not even start with our sex life. It had gone from not often enough to practically non-existent. But like an idiot, I kept telling myself that life gets busy, people get tired, work takes over. I didn't want to believe the alternative, that she was screwing around with someone else. Then came the day I stopped by her office unannounced. Now, to be clear, I wasn't snooping, not yet, anyway. I was just dropping off lunch. We'd had a bit of a spat that morning over something ridiculous. I think it was about cleaning the bathroom, and I figured surprising her with her favorite takeout might smooth things over. I hadn't told her I was coming, but that wasn't unusual. I'd done it a few times before, and she'd always been happy to see me. So, armed with a bag full of sushi and my best attempt at an apology, I walked into the office building with a stupid grin on my face. Her desk was empty. "She's out with a client," her assistant told me, barely looking up from her computer. She said it so casually that I didn't even think to question it. I just nodded and left the food on her desk with a note. But as I walked back to my car, something bugged me. Out with a client? At noon? Maybe it was just a lunch meeting, I thought. I drove home, pushing the thought to the back of my mind. But later that night, when Sarah came home, I asked her about her day, just to see if she'd mentioned the lunch meeting. She didn't. She talked about the same old stuff, meetings, emails, her boss being a pain in the ass. Not once did she mention going out with anyone, let alone a client. That's when the seed of doubt took root. I couldn't shake it. She was hiding something, I knew it. But the question was, what? Over the next few days, I became hyper-aware of everything Sarah did. Her phone was always within arm's reach, even in the bathroom. She started dressing nicer than usual, even when she claimed she was just working late or heading out to meet some work friend I'd never heard of. Every time she left the house, I couldn't help but wonder if I'd see her with someone else, someone she wasn't supposed to be with. The breaking point came 2 weeks later. She'd been distant all day, barely saying 2 words to me, even though it was a Sunday and we were both home. I asked her what was wrong, and she snapped at me, something about needing space and feeling overwhelmed by work. That was when it hit me. She was stressed, sure, but not because of work. She was stressed because she was juggling 2 lives, trying to keep up appearances with me while sneaking around behind my back. And the worst part? I still didn't have proof. That night, after she went to bed, I did something I never thought I'd do in my entire life. I went through her phone. I felt like a complete asshole even as I picked it up off the nightstand. My heart pounded in my chest as I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the screen, hoping I was wrong, praying I wouldn't find anything. Her phone wasn't locked, at least not with a password I didn't know. We'd always shared everything, including our passcodes. She had nothing to hide, right? I opened her messages first. Nothing out of the ordinary there, just conversations with her mom, her friends, some work group chat. Then I went to her email. Again, nothing. Everything was clean, professional, and boring as hell. For a split second, I felt guilty. I thought I was being paranoid, imagining things. But something kept pushing me forward, telling me I wasn't crazy. I swiped over to her social media apps, and that's when I saw it. Snapchat. We never used Snapchat. I mean, who does unless they're sending something they don't want saved? And there it was, right in front of me, a recent message from someone named Matt. I clicked on it, and my blood turned cold. It was gone, of course, because that's how Snapchat works. But the message preview on the notification still lingered on the screen. I can't wait to see you again. That was enough. I put her phone back exactly where I found it and lay down in bed next to her. She was already asleep, blissfully unaware of the storm raging in my head. I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. My mind was running wild, trying to piece everything together. The late nights, the lies, the sudden change in her behavior, it all made sense now. I just needed to catch her in the act. The next day, I called in sick to work and spent the morning planning. I had no intention of confronting her right away. No, I needed solid proof first. Something undeniable that would blow up any bullshit excuses she might try to feed me. So I started doing some research. I read up on tracking apps and surveillance equipment, all while trying to calm my nerves. In the end, I decided to keep it simple. I ordered a GPS tracker for her car. It wasn't expensive, just something small I could slip under the passenger seat without her noticing. I needed to know where she was going, what she was really doing when she said she was working late or out with friends. It took a couple of days for the tracker to arrive, and in that time, I played the role of the clueless husband, acting like everything was normal while inside I was unraveling. The night I planted the tracker, I felt like a goddamn spy. My heart was racing as I crept into the garage after she'd gone to bed. I was half expecting her to wake up and catch me, but she didn't. I slipped the device under the seat, checked to make sure it was working, and went back inside. And then I waited. It didn't take long. The very next day, she said she was going out after work to meet some friends. I casually asked who, and she gave me the usual vague answer, something about the girls from the office. I didn't push, didn't even blink. I just smiled, kissed her goodbye, and waited for her to leave. The moment she was out the door, I pulled up the tracking app on my phone. Sure enough, she wasn't going anywhere near the restaurant she'd mentioned. Instead, she drove halfway across town to some residential area I didn't recognize. I watched as her car parked outside one of the houses, and then I stared at the screen for what felt like an eternity. I knew what was happening inside that house, and it took everything in me not to drive over there and catch them in the act right then and there. But I wasn't ready. Not yet. She came home late that night, smelling like someone else's cologne. I could barely look at her, but I had to act normal. I needed more. The next day, I hired a private investigator. If I was going to blow up my life, I wanted to do it with all the cards on the table. It took the PI 2 days to get back to me. When he called, I was sitting at work, pretending like everything was fine while my world was crumbling inside. I stepped out of the office to take the call, and his words confirmed what I already knew. "She's seeing a guy named Matt," the PI said. "They've been meeting up at his place, looks like once or twice a week. I've got photos, videos, everything." I didn't even ask to see them. I just thanked him, hung up the phone, and stood there in the parking lot, feeling the ground shift beneath me. When I got the proof from the PI, it felt like someone had ripped the air out of my lungs. There it was, everything laid out in black and white, photos of my wife, Sarah, walking hand in hand with some asshole named Matt. A guy I'd never even heard of. They weren't even trying to hide it, hugging in public, kissing in parking lots, going into his house together. I stared at the photos until the lines between them started to blur. The PI had done his job well. I had more than enough to destroy her lies, but now came the hardest part, facing her. I'd thought about how I would confront her 100 different ways. Sometimes I pictured myself staying calm, laying it all out for her, watching her crumble under the weight of her own betrayal. Other times, I imagined screaming, throwing things, demanding answers. But the truth is, no amount of planning can prepare you for the moment you have to look your spouse in the eye and tell them you know they've been lying to you, that they betrayed you in the worst possible way. The day I confronted her started out like any other. I was working from home, trying to keep my head down and focus on anything but the photos I had sitting in a folder on my laptop. She had a late shift that day, so I had plenty of time to stew in my thoughts. By the time she walked through the door around 6 p.m., I was practically vibrating with tension. She came in with a cheery "Hey, how was your day?" like everything was perfectly normal. Like she hadn't just spent the past week lying to my face. "Busy," I replied, keeping my voice as even as I could manage. "You?" "Same," she said, shrugging off her coat. "Boss was riding my ass all day." I watched her carefully, trying to see if there was any hint of guilt, any sign that she knew what was coming. But there was nothing. Just the same routine as always. She wasn't even looking at me, her eyes were on her phone, probably texting that piece of shit Matt. That was it. I couldn't hold it in any longer. "We need to talk," I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She finally looked up at me, eyebrows raised. "About what?" "About the lies, Sarah," I snapped, standing up from the couch. "About Matt." Her face froze. For the first time, I saw the mask slip. She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. It was like I'd punched her in the gut, and she was trying to catch her breath. Good. Let her feel a fraction of the panic that had been eating me alive for days. "I don't know what you're talking about," she finally muttered, her voice unsteady. "Don't," I said, holding up my hand to cut her off. "Don't you dare try to bullshit me. I know, Sarah. I know everything." Her eyes darted toward the kitchen, like she was thinking about running or maybe grabbing a glass of water to buy herself some time. But there was no escape from this. Not anymore. I don't know what you think you know, but I swear. "I hired a private investigator," I interrupted, my words like a hammer driving nails into the coffin. "I've seen the photos, Sarah. I've seen you with him. I know what you've been doing." Her face went pale. She blinked rapidly, like she was trying to process what I just said, but she couldn't. It was almost pathetic how unprepared she was for this moment, as if she'd never considered that I might catch on to her lies. She started, then stopped, her voice cracking. "It's not what you think." I let out a bitter laugh. "It's exactly what I think." For the first time, I saw her panic. She dropped her phone on the counter and took a step toward me, her hands out like she was trying to calm me down. Okay, just, can we talk about this? Please?" "Talk about what?" I snapped, my voice rising. "About how you've been screwing some guy behind my back for months? What's there to talk about, Sarah? Just admit it." She flinched at my words, and for a second, I thought she might actually come clean. But instead, she started crying. Big, dramatic tears that she probably thought would make me soften, make me feel sorry for her. But I wasn't having any of it. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she sobbed, covering her face with her hands. It just happened, okay? I was lonely, and you were always working, and I don't know, I made a mistake." "A mistake?" I spat. "A mistake is forgetting our anniversary. A mistake is leaving the car lights on overnight. You've been lying to me, cheating on me, and you call that a mistake?" "I didn't plan for this," she cried, dropping her hands and staring at me with wide, tear-filled eyes. "I never wanted to hurt you, I swear. I didn't mean for it to go this far. I was lonely, okay? We haven't been connecting lately, and I felt my blood boiling as she rambled on, trying to justify herself. "So you decided to fix that by screwing another man? That's your solution to not connecting?" Her lip trembled, and for a second, she looked like she was about to collapse right there on the floor. I know it sounds bad, but it wasn't serious. I never wanted it to turn into this. I love you, okay? It's always been you. This thing with Matt. It didn't mean anything. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I actually laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that didn't feel like it came from me. Didn't mean anything? You've been sneaking off to his house behind my back for months, and you expect me to believe it didn't mean anything? She was full on sobbing now, her shoulders shaking as she wiped her eyes. I'm sorry, okay? I'm so sorry. I'll end it. I'll never see him again, I promise. I don't give a damn what you do with him, I said coldly. You're done with both of us. Her head snapped up, and her tears stopped, just like that. What? I'm done, Sarah, I said, my voice flat and emotionless. We're done. You can have your little affair, you can go live with Matt, or whoever the hell you want. I don't care. But I'm done with this. No, she choked out, stepping closer to me. Please, don't say that. We can fix this, we can go to counseling, we can. No, I cut her off. You don't get to fix this. You broke it. You broke us. There's no going back. She grabbed my arm, holding on like it was the only thing keeping her upright. Please, she whispered, her voice desperate. I'll do anything. Just, don't leave me. I'll cut him off, I'll never see him again, I'll change. Please, we can work through this. I pulled my arm out of her grasp and took a step back, shaking my head. You think this is something we can just work through? Like it's a rough patch? You've been cheating on me for months, Sarah. You've been lying to me every single day. There's no fixing this. Her tears were back, but this time they weren't the dramatic kind. She was really crying now, her whole body trembling as she looked at me, pleading with her eyes. Please, she whispered. I love you. The words hung in the air between us, and for a second, I almost believed her. But then I remembered the photos, the lies, the late nights where she was out with him while I was at home, waiting for her like an idiot. I loved you, too, I said quietly. But that doesn't matter anymore. She sank to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably as I turned and walked out of the room. My heart felt like it had been ripped out of my chest, but I didn't stop. I couldn't stay there any longer. I couldn't watch her cry and beg and pretend like she hadn't just torn our entire life apart. I went upstairs, grabbed a bag, and started throwing clothes into it. I wasn't sure where I was going yet, but anywhere was better than here. As I packed, I could hear her downstairs, still crying, still pleading with me to come back, to talk to her, to give her a chance. But I was done. I'd made up my mind. This wasn't something that could be fixed. Not now. Not ever. I didn't leave the house that night. I wanted to, God knows I did. I had my bag packed and ready to go, but something stopped me from walking out that door. Maybe it was the years we'd spent together, the memories we'd built. I didn't bother replying. Instead, I turned and walked upstairs to the guest room where I'd been sleeping for the past few nights. I locked the door behind me and lay down on the bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling a strange sense of relief wash over me. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. But I was done being the victim. From now on, I was the one in control. And Sarah was going to feel every bit of the fallout she'd brought on herself. I thought breaking Sarah down would give me some kind of satisfaction. And for a moment, it did. Watching her face collapse when I told her what I'd done, seeing her crumble under the weight of her own lies, that felt good. But it wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. Because while I'd hurt Sarah, there was someone else out there who needed to feel the consequences just as badly. Matt. The guy who thought he could walk into my life and wreck it without even knowing me. He probably didn't give me a second thought, didn't even consider the fact that I existed beyond the boundaries of whatever fantasy he and Sarah had cooked up. To him, I was just a name, a faceless obstacle. But that was about to change. Because while Sarah could cry and beg for forgiveness, Matt was going to pay in ways he couldn't imagine. He didn't get to just sneak around with my wife and walk away like nothing had happened. No, I had plans for him. First, I had to find out who he was. The private investigator had given me some basic details: his name, where he lived, but that wasn't enough for what I had in mind. I needed more. I needed to know what made him tick, where he worked, who his friends were. I needed to get inside his life the way he'd gotten inside mine. And luckily, I knew just where to start. The PI had mentioned Matt worked in some mid-level management job for a tech company. Nothing glamorous, but enough to keep him comfortable. I figured a guy like him would be easy to track down online. So I sat down at my laptop and started digging. It didn't take long. A few searches later, I had his LinkedIn profile up on my screen, complete with a smug-looking headshot and a list of his accomplishments that made him look far more important than he probably was. I scrolled through his connections, noted the company name, and made a mental list of all the people he worked with. But LinkedIn wasn't enough. I needed something more personal, something that would get me closer to him. So I went deeper. Facebook. Instagram. Twitter. He wasn't hard to find. His Instagram was public idiot and filled with pictures of him doing the usual bullshit, flexing at the gym, drinking with his buddies, a few vacation shots. Nothing out of the ordinary. But what caught my attention was his relationship status, or rather, the lack of one. No sign of a girlfriend, no mention of Sarah, nothing. It was as if she didn't even exist in his world, just a little side piece he'd pick up and drop when it suited him. It made me sick. I scrolled through his photos, noting his friends, his hangout spots. He had a habit of tagging himself at a few bars around town, always the same ones. Good to know. I kept scrolling until I hit the jackpot, a picture of him with his arm around some other woman. A brunette, smiling at the camera like she had no idea what kind of man she was with. I clicked on her profile. They'd been together for years, based on the number of photos they had together, but it didn't seem like they were married. Probably his long-term girlfriend. Perfect. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen, feeling the pieces fall into place. This wasn't just about getting back at Matt for sleeping with my wife. This was about tearing apart the life he'd built, just like he'd torn apart mine. If he wanted to destroy my marriage, then I'd destroy whatever relationship he had left. The next step was easy. I took screenshots of the PI's report, photos of Matt and Sarah together, and sent them to the woman in his photos. I kept the message simple, much like the emails I'd sent to Sarah's family. Hey, I thought you should know your boyfriend has been sleeping with my wife for the past few months. Attached are some photos of them together. Do with that what you will. I hit send and sat back, feeling a strange sense of calm settle over me. I didn't expect an immediate response, and that was fine. The damage was already done. There was no way she'd look at those photos and not confront him. I couldn't wait to see how that conversation went down. But that was just the beginning. I knew where Matt worked now, thanks to LinkedIn, and I had enough information from the investigator to cause some real trouble. So I picked up the phone and made a few calls. The first was to his company's HR department. I told them I had some concerns about one of their employees, Matt, and that he had been engaging in an inappropriate relationship with a married woman. I made sure to emphasize that it was happening during work hours, at company events, and that I had proof if they wanted it. HR departments are funny like that. They love to avoid scandal, and they love to make problems disappear quietly. By the time I was done with the call, I could tell they were already taking notes, preparing to look into it. They wouldn't fire him on the spot, these things take time, but I had planted the seed. Whether or not he kept his job, it wouldn't matter. His work life was about to get a lot more uncomfortable. After that, I did something that felt even better. I called up one of the bars he frequented, the one where he liked to tag himself on Instagram, and booked it for a private event. A fake name, fake reason, but I paid in advance. It was easy enough. Then, I contacted all of Matt's friends through social media, the ones who showed up in his photos, and invited them to a surprise party for him at that same bar. I made sure to mention it was going to be a huge deal, something Matt wouldn't want to miss. The whole thing was a lie, of course. There was no party. But I wanted to see how it would play out when his friends showed up, expecting some grand celebration, only to find out that Matt hadn't planned anything. Would he show up? Would his girlfriend be there, waiting with questions about the photos? I didn't know, but the chaos alone was worth the effort. As for Sarah, I didn't tell her any of this. She was still trying to claw her way back into my good graces, making half-hearted attempts at conversation, asking if we could talk things out. I didn't respond. I just went about my day like she wasn't even there, watching her squirm every time I walked by without acknowledging her existence. Let her wonder. Let her sit in the mess she'd made. I wasn't done yet. The next week, I started showing up at the same gym Matt used. I'd found it through his Instagram posts, of course, and while I wasn't much of a gym guy myself, I figured it was the perfect place to cross paths with him. I didn't want a confrontation, not yet. I just wanted him to feel the same paranoia I'd felt, the same gut-churning anxiety that comes with knowing someone is watching you. So I'd go in, lift a few weights, and make sure to catch his eye. The first time I saw him, he didn't recognize me, which wasn't surprising. But by the third or fourth time, I saw the flicker of confusion in his eyes, the way his brow furrowed like he was trying to place me. I didn't approach him. I didn't need to. Just being there was enough to make him uncomfortable. But the real fun came 2 weeks later. The bar party had come and gone, and I'd heard through the grapevine via a fake social media account I'd set up that it had been a complete disaster. His friends had shown up, confused as hell, and Matt hadn't known what to say. His girlfriend had been there, too, looking furious, no doubt because of the photos I'd sent her. By the end of the night, people were asking questions, and Matt had looked like a deer in headlights. But that wasn't my favorite part. No, the best part came when I walked into the gym a week later and saw him standing by the lockers, arguing with someone on his phone. His face was flushed, his voice low but angry, and I could tell from his body language that he was trying and failing to calm someone down. I didn't need to hear the conversation to know what it was about. My guess? His girlfriend had finally had enough. I watched him from across the room, pretending to stretch, while he slammed his phone into his locker and stormed out of the gym. That's right, Matt. Welcome to the shitstorm you helped create. After that, I didn't see him at the gym again. Whether he switched locations or just quit altogether, I didn't care. I'd done what I came to do. I'd rattled his life, shaken it to the core, and now he had to pick up the pieces. He thought he could screw around with my wife and get away with it? He thought he could just disappear into the background while I dealt with the fallout? Not a chance. It wasn't over yet, though. I still had one more card to play. The PI had done more digging after I hired him, and as it turned out, Matt wasn't just an asshole, he was a thief. He'd been skimming off company funds for months, siphoning money into a personal account under his girlfriend's name. The PI had found it all, buried in emails and bank records. And now, I had everything I needed to take him down for good. So I sent the evidence to his boss, along with a letter detailing exactly how long the theft had been going on and how much he'd stolen. It was only a matter of time before the hammer came down on him. By the end of the month, I was sure he'd be out of a job, maybe even facing legal action. And as far as I was concerned, he deserved every bit of it. I wasn't just taking revenge on him for sleeping with my wife. I was dismantling his entire life, piece by piece, the way he'd dismantled mine. By the time I was done, he wouldn't have anything left. No girlfriend, no job, no reputation. Just the ashes of the life he'd tried to build at my expense. And that, to me, was justice. After everything, I wasn't sure how it would end with Sarah. She'd been walking on eggshells for weeks, tiptoeing around me like a scared child waiting to be punished. And honestly, I liked it that way. Every time I passed her in the hallway or sat silently across from her at dinner, I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes darted toward me, searching for any sign of what I was thinking. But I gave her nothing. She was expecting an explosion, a dramatic showdown where she could cry and beg for forgiveness all over again. But that wasn't going to happen. Not anymore. I had made up my mind, and it wasn't just about her anymore. It was about me. My life, my future. I waited until late on a Friday evening to finally have the conversation. She had been staying home more often, canceling plans, trying to prove that she wasn't seeing Matt anymore. For all I knew, that might have been true. Maybe she'd ended things with him, maybe she hadn't. It didn't matter. The damage was done, and there was no coming back from it. She had shown me exactly who she was, and no amount of staying home or trying to fix things would change that. That night, I came home after spending a few hours at the gym. The house was quiet, and Sarah was sitting at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of tea like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes immediately searching my face for any hint of how the night was going to play out. "Hey," she said softly, her voice tentative. "How was your day?" I didn't answer right away. I took my time, setting down my keys, taking off my jacket. Then, I finally looked at her. "We need to talk." Her face paled, and she set the mug down carefully, like she was trying not to let her hands shake. "Okay," she whispered. "About what?" "You know what." I pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. There was no need for a long preamble or any drawn-out explanation. We both knew what this was about. "This isn't working anymore, Sarah." She flinched, her eyes dropping to the table. "I know I screwed up," she said, her voice barely audible. "But I've been trying, haven't I? I haven't seen him, I haven't. I've been here, with you. I've been trying to make things right. Trying isn't enough." My voice was calm, steady, but there was no room for debate. "It doesn't erase what you did. It doesn't change the fact that you lied to me, cheated on me for months, and thought you could just walk away from it like nothing happened." She swallowed hard, her eyes brimming with tears. "I don't want to lose you," she whispered. "I know I've hurt you, but we can fix this. We can go to counseling, we can work through it." "No, we can't." I leaned back in my chair, crossing my arms. "This isn't something you can just work through. It's broken, Sarah. We're broken." Her lip trembled, and she wiped at her eyes quickly, trying to hold herself together. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't. I wasn't thinking. I was lonely, I was confused, and I made a mistake. But I love you. I've always loved you. That's why I ended it with him. Because I love you." It took everything in me not to laugh at the absurdity of it all. Love? Was that what this was supposed to be? If this was love, then it was the most twisted version of it I'd ever seen. "You don't do this to someone you love, Sarah." She shook her head, her tears coming harder now. "I do love you. I got lost, okay? I didn't know how to handle everything, and I made a mistake. But it was just a mistake. Please, we've been together for so long. Don't throw it all away over something I regret more than anything." "Throw it away?" I repeated, my voice cold. "You already did that when you decided to crawl into bed with another man. This isn't on me, Sarah. You're the one who threw it away." She sobbed then, her hands coming up to cover her face as she cried. I watched her for a moment, feeling strangely detached from it all. There was a time when seeing her like this would have broken me. When I would have given in just to make her stop crying. But that time had passed. I'd done my part. I'd stayed quiet, let her live in the house while I plotted out my next move. I gave her more than enough time to show me who she really was, and she had. Now it was time to end it. "I'm filing for divorce," I said, my voice steady and final. Her head snapped up, her tear-streaked face full of shock. "No," she gasped. "Please, no. You don't mean that. We can still fix this. I'll do anything." "It's over," I cut her off, my tone leaving no room for argument. "I've already spoken to a lawyer. We'll divide up the assets, sell the house, and move on. I don't want to drag this out." Her face crumbled again, and she reached across the table, grabbing my hand in desperation. "Please, we can't just end it like this. We've built so much together. Please, don't do this. I'll go to therapy, I'll do anything you want, just please don't leave me." I pulled my hand away from hers, the touch of her skin sending a wave of disgust through me. "I'm not leaving you, Sarah. You already left me the moment you started sneaking around behind my back. You just didn't realize it yet. She broke down completely then, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. Please, she begged, her voice barely a whisper through the tears. I don't want to lose you. I stood up, grabbing the folder I'd left on the counter earlier, the one with the divorce papers. I dropped it in front of her, watching as her eyes widened in shock. It's all in there, I said, my voice emotionless. I'm not going to drag this out. You sign, I sign, and we move on. You can keep the car. I'll take care of the house for now, and we'll sell it when we're ready. It's all pretty straightforward. She didn't say anything, just stared at the folder like it was some kind of weapon that had been pointed at her. Her hands were trembling as she reached for it, flipping through the pages. This isn't real, she whispered, her voice shaky. This can't be real. It's as real as it gets, I replied, stepping away from the table. You can have your lawyer look it over, but it's a fair split. I'm not trying to screw you over, Sarah. I just want this done. She shook her head slowly, still staring at the papers. I can't believe this. Believe it, I said flatly. It's happening, whether you like it or not. She looked up at me then, her eyes filled with pain, anger, and a hint of something else. You're really going to throw everything away? Everything we've built together? I didn't throw anything away, I repeated, my voice hard. You did. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. The only sound in the room was her uneven breathing, the quiet sobs she was trying to hold back. I could see it in her face, the realization that this wasn't some temporary fight. That I wasn't going to change my mind. This was the end. Eventually, she wiped her eyes again, her breath shaky as she spoke. So, what now? Now we move on, I said simply. We sign the papers, divide up the assets, and go our separate ways. Her voice broke again, softer this time, almost defeated. And that's it? That's it. She sat there for a moment, staring down at the papers in front of her. I could see her mind racing, trying to find some way out, some last-ditch effort to save what was already gone. But there was nothing left to save. Not anymore. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes red and swollen from crying. I loved you, she whispered. I didn't flinch. You had a funny way of showing it. With that, I turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her sitting there alone with the divorce papers. I didn't look back. There was no point. It was over. For good this time. As I walked upstairs, I felt a strange sense of relief wash over me. I hadn't shouted, I hadn't thrown things, and I hadn't made a scene. I had simply ended it, cut it off like a dead limb. There would be no more pleading, no more tears, no more pretending that we could fix what had been shattered beyond repair. The next steps were clear. The marriage was dead, and now it was just a matter of making it official. She could cry all she wanted, but it didn't matter anymore. She was just a part of my past now, a chapter that was closed, never to be opened again. And as far as I was concerned, that chapter had ended exactly the way it needed to. It's funny how fast things can move once you've made a decision. The moment I handed Sarah those divorce papers, something clicked into place. Like I had finally closed the door on a room that had been suffocating me for months. All the arguments, the lies, the sneaking around, it was over. I wasn't going to let her pull me back into the mess she'd made of our marriage. She'd betrayed me, destroyed any trust we had, and I wasn't interested in picking up the pieces. She signed the papers 2 days later. There was no big scene, no more pleading or crying. I think she finally understood that it was done. Maybe she even realized that dragging it out would only make things worse for her. Either way, she signed, and once the ink dried, I felt the weight lift off my shoulders. All that was left now were the practical details, dividing up the house, the bank accounts, the car. Mundane stuff. And while that was a hassle, I didn't really care. I just wanted to get it all over with and move on with my life. But as much as I wanted to be done with Sarah, there was still one loose end to tie up, Matt. After I sent those photos to his girlfriend and tipped off his company about the money he'd been skimming, I'd been waiting to see what would happen. I'd heard through the PI that things had gone south for him fast. His girlfriend had confronted him, and it hadn't gone well. She'd packed her things and left, and Matt was stuck trying to explain away the affair and the missing money at work. I hadn't seen him since I stopped going to his gym, but that didn't mean I wasn't keeping tabs on him. I still had the PI's report, and I'd been following his social media quietly from an account he wouldn't recognize. His posts had become less frequent, the upbeat tone of his earlier ones replaced with vague, mopey updates about facing challenges and personal growth. What a joke. I decided to pay him one final visit. Not to talk or fight, I'd gotten what I wanted out of him already, but to make sure he understood that his life was now a wreck, just like mine had been. So one afternoon, after finalizing the details of the divorce with Sarah's lawyer, I drove to the bar he'd often tagged himself at on Instagram. I wasn't expecting him to be there, but I knew enough about his habits to guess that he'd end up there eventually. And I was right. He walked in about an hour after I did, looking worse for wear. His usual confident swagger was gone, replaced by a kind of defeated slump. He sat down at the bar, ordered a drink, and stared blankly at the TV above him. He didn't even notice me sitting a few stools down. I watched him for a while, wondering how much his life had fallen apart since everything came to light. From what I'd gathered, his company had quietly let him go after investigating the missing funds, and he was now in between jobs, trying to figure out his next move. His ex-girlfriend had cut him off completely, blocked him on all platforms, and moved out of their apartment. He was alone. Just like I'd been. I considered going over to him, saying something. But what was the point? He wasn't worth my time anymore. I'd done what I set out to do, destroy his life the way he'd destroyed mine. He wasn't a threat anymore. He was just a sad, washed-up guy drinking away his problems, and I wasn't about to let him drag me down with him. So instead of approaching him, I finished my drink, paid the tab, and walked out. I didn't need to see him suffer any more than he already was. I knew what I'd done to him, and that was enough. The day the divorce was finalized, Sarah didn't even show up to court. I wasn't surprised. She'd barely been involved in the process since signing the papers. It was like she'd checked out completely, resigned to whatever was going to happen. Fine by me. I didn't want any more drama, and the fact that she was staying quiet made it all the easier. The judge went through the formalities, asked a few questions, and that was it. The marriage was officially over. 10 years, reduced to a few signatures on some papers. I walked out of the courthouse feeling lighter than I had in months. I'd expected to feel angry, sad, maybe even a little guilty. But all I felt was relief. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I drove out to a quiet spot by the lake we used to visit when things were good between us. I hadn't been there in years, not since before the affair. It was a small, secluded place, with a picnic table and a view of the water that always seemed to calm me down. Sitting there, I thought about everything that had happened over the past few months. The lies, the betrayal, the revenge. It felt like a lifetime ago that I'd first found out about Sarah and Matt. Now, looking back, I couldn't believe I'd let it go on for as long as I did. But the thing is, I learned a lot about myself through all of this. More than I ever thought I would. I learned that trusting someone blindly isn't always a good thing. I'd given Sarah everything, my love, my support, my trust, and she'd thrown it all away without a second thought. That was on her. But I also realized that I had let myself get too comfortable, too complacent. I hadn't paid attention to the warning signs, hadn't asked the right questions, and by the time I did, it was too late. That wasn't going to happen again. I also learned that revenge isn't as satisfying as people think it is. Sure, it felt good to take Matt down, to make Sarah pay for what she'd done. But once the dust settled, I realized that I wasn't getting anything back. My marriage was still dead, and no amount of payback could change that. It gave me closure, sure, but it didn't fix anything. In the end, all I had left was the wreckage of what used to be my life, and now it was up to me to rebuild it. I sat there by the lake for a long time, watching the sun set over the water, thinking about what was next for me. The house was going to be sold, and I was looking for a new place to live. My job was steady, and I had enough savings to get by for a while. I didn't need much else. As for Sarah, I didn't know what was going to happen to her, and I didn't care. She'd made her choices, and now she had to live with them. Whether she ended up with Matt or someone else wasn't my problem anymore. We were done. For good. But the thought of starting over didn't scare me like I thought it would. In fact, it felt freeing. I didn't have to deal with the lies, the stress, or the constant anxiety of wondering where she was or who she was with. I was free to do whatever I wanted, to build my life on my own terms. And that was something I hadn't felt in a long time. In the weeks that followed, I focused on myself. I got back into my old hobbies, reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years, and slowly began to piece my life back together. It wasn't easy. There were days when the loneliness hit hard, when I wondered if I'd ever be able to trust someone again. But those days got fewer and farther between, and eventually, I started to feel like myself again. One day, while I was going through some old boxes in the garage, I found a photo of Sarah and me from our first year together. We looked so happy, so full of hope for the future. I stared at the picture for a long time, trying to reconcile the people in the photo with the people we'd become. It was impossible. We weren't those people anymore. So I tore the photo in half and threw it away. It didn't hurt like I thought it would. It felt like I was finally letting go of the past and making room for whatever was coming next. I didn't know what the future held for me, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. I wasn't looking back anymore. I was looking forward. Because in the end, that's all you can do. The marriage was over, the revenge was done, and now, it was time to start living again.